Residents of North Dublin are to be subject to severe traffic delays when new measures are introduced on one of the worst bottlenecks on the north side of the city, because councillors have agreed to restrict cars to one lane in a 300-metre section in front of Fairview Park from the junction of the Malahide Road to Merville Avenue, and this is to make way for a new cycle path. These plans were approved following a heated campaign to prevent the felling of historic trees along the route. Now, I'm joined by Damian O'Farrell, independent councillor for the Clontarf ward. He's with me in studio. And on the line is Ciaran Cuffe, Green Party councillor and chair of Dublin City Council Transport Committee. You're both very welcome to the programme. Now, Damian, this obviously affects people in your ward particularly, and people coming from further afield who pass through Clontarf on the way into the city. First of all, the move for a cycle lane, where did that come from? Because you already have a wonderful cycle path all the way along the seafront at Clontarf.
I suppose it was to continue that cycle path, I suppose, from Clontarf, from the sea there, into Eamon Street. And it first came on the table back in November 2013. There was some stakeholder presentations. So from 2013 up to 2017, there's been talks about it. And the public consultation part started earlier this year. So
now, in that original proposal, the trees would have to go. These are trees not within Fairview Park, but outside along the pavement. Yeah. And to make room for the bikes, the trees would go.
Yeah, about 60. Yeah.
So what happened when that detail was revealed?
Well, that would have been flagged early on. It was in the original plan, and it would have been flagged. 198 people made submissions, and the vast majority of them, quite a lot of those, would have mentioned the tree. So it was quite on. Then a campaign, I suppose, started more recently in August, I think it was, and there was about 15,000 signatures. And then I believe that Dublin City Council felt then that they really had to address this, and then they came up then with this knee-jerk reaction, which I believe, to remove a traffic lane.
So there are 2 lanes available to cars at the moment, is that it?
Yeah. And
this would be reduced to 1.
Yeah, and just to give you the Howth Road, the Clontarf Road and the Malahide Road, which between them have 5 lanes of traffic. And there's all of the north side. It's not just Clontarf, it's all the way up to Malahide, Portmarnock, Howth, Coolock, everywhere.
And they all feed into this bottleneck.
Into this little pinch.
Yeah. Now, it's a pinch even with 2 lanes.
It is, yeah.
What do you think will be the impact when it's pinched down to 1 lane?
Well, it'll be exactly like the Drumconda Road over at the Skylon Hotel when people are coming down from North County Dublin, and the traffic just stops. And we're always saying if we could do something about that, but we've no land. And here we're giving up a traffic lane when there's no need. There's perfectly space in Fairview Park for this cycle path. Okay.
But the idea, I mean, anyone who even thinks about what happens when you squeeze a hose, in order to get the water out to water your plants, the water has to move faster, but it's not possible with traffic.
No, it's not.
Because a pinch point should give rise to higher speeds to make the traffic flow at the same rate. Yeah. In this case, it can't. There's no room for the traffic. So it is going to slow everything down to a crawl. What's your anticipation of the impact, say, all the way back to Artane, Malahide, all the way back to Sutton?
Yeah, there's just one thing we're forgetting. There's an additional 2 pedestrian crossings going in on that point as well. So that's on top of that. There'll be backlogs possibly to Howth, possibly to Coolock, possibly to Raheny. There's just backlogs the whole way. And I suppose maybe the council want people then to use public transport. We'd nearly need a Lewis train along there.
Now, the removal of this lane, was that flagged? Because they have a thing called a Part 18 where you and I would have to apply for planning permission from the local council to build a shed or whatever it might be, or an extension. They have to have a Part 8, system. So in their Part 8, did they talk about the removal of a traffic lane?
No, it was never flagged. It was never flagged till possibly late August of this year.
Part 8 insists that the public have to have a say.
Yes.
So the public have had no say about the removal of a lane. No. I mean, they weren't given a choice. It's the trees or the traffic. That wasn't the choice they were given.
No. And this is a substantial material change. I think you mentioned that at the start. This is a substantial change. This first came on. It was to be discussed at a council meeting in September, but it was deferred because it just was sprung upon us. And then we were to discuss it again last night, and the councillors decided that they didn't discuss it. So it's a €7.5 million project. They weren't even going to discuss, and they had a vote. And the public, the people who made those 198 submissions, they were never asked. And the public wouldn't have known about this till this morning.
All right. Now, I'm very familiar with the area. I passed through it probably at least once a month, maybe more frequently. I went to school close enough to it, so I know it very well. Yeah. And I'm baffled as to why this new cycle lane is running along Fairview Park it would seem to me the obvious thing would be to dip into Fairview Park with your cycle lane and then come out at the end of this to join up with the roadway where there is enough width. Was that proposed?
It was certainly flagged in all the submissions. I did that myself. Quite a lot of people.
But the council never.
Not really. Not for this segregated cycleway. I mean, the cycle lobby that's where they wanted it. It's sensible. From Ainsley Bridge into Eamon Street, it's a different thing. There's thoroughfares. There's roads coming out onto the traffic on the city side. But for the park, it would seem the sensible thing to do. It would really...
I mean, it'd be a nice little break from mixing with the traffic. You whiz into the park for only a few hundred yards, but still very pleasant and nice.
Fairview Park needs a break. It needs a break. It needs some investment, some lighting. It needs some growth, some life in there. It would be very welcome.
Okay. Ciaran Cuffe, this seems to be absolute crackers stuff from your committee.
I don't think so, Pat. I think it's a reasonable suggestion that will improve traffic safety for vulnerable road users.
You mean for the cyclists? That's basically
no, I mean for everybody. I mean, there's been 4 fatalities.
You're probably right that it will slow the traffic down so much that sure we'll all be able to nip between the cars and cross the road wherever. You won't need the pedestrian crossings because the traffic will be stopped.
Well, Pat, pardon me for speaking while you're interrupting me, but the substantive point I was about to make is that 4 people have lost their lives beside Fairview Park in a 10-year period. It is a racetrack at the moment. There is a huge amount of traffic. As Damian points out quite rightfully, a lot of traffic is concentrated into that area. And I take that point. But so what is your
solution? No, because we obviously for the cyclists, if you do what you're doing, the trees are safe, which is a good thing for a green councillor to be able to maintain. So that's good. The cyclists are safer.
That's what 15,000 people were looking for.
But the cyclists are safer. That's a given as well under your proposal.
Yeah.
But the motorists are at a standstill.
Well, I don't think they will be. Pat, I remember 20 years ago, as do you, when there was proposals to have a bus lane on the Cllr Road and then eventually to bring that bus lane through Donnybrook. And if you look at it, at the time, people said it's madness that you would take 3 car lanes of traffic and reduce that down to 1. And yet it's worked out.
No, it hasn't. At rush hours, it is at a standstill. It crawls and crawls and crawls for about half a kilometre or more. Then as you get down to places you can turn off, Waterloo Road, into Leeson Street, into Fitzwilliam Square, you get dissipation. But you know that is the big bottleneck in the mornings coming in from the N11.
I think in general what we are doing is giving buses and bikes the road space, and indeed pedestrians, the road space that they deserve. And we want to move towards making it a lot easier to get around.
But your own original proposal was to maintain 2 car lanes, so therefore you thought they were needed, and the sacrifice that had to be made were the trees.
Well,
and under public pressure
was widening the road, and when you look at a road that is a racetrack already, I think further widening of that road would not have been a good idea, because traffic behaviour changes the wider the road that you put in.
Can I ask you, though, about at what times of the day is it a racetrack?
Well,
it's not a racetrack at rush hour, that's for sure.
No, off-peak it is a racetrack, and I think what we want to do is make it a lot easier to get in and out of town by bus, by bike, and indeed by walking. Damian and yourself, you did suggest that we would put the bike lane through the park, and I think that's a reasonable suggestion, but it is quite challenging, particularly for vulnerable users, and I'm thinking about women and children, to cycle through a park at night time. And yes, we could put in lighting, but I think our parks department are a bit concerned about that in terms of how it would affect the park. And I think if I was feeling vulnerable, I'm not sure if I'd want to be several hundred metres into the park.
Why do you have to be 700 metres into the park?
Why can't several hundred metres?
Why don't you just go along inside the peripheral boundary? Just whiz in. You wouldn't be too far away.
I think that's a reasonable proposal.
Why did it not come before the council if it's common sense?
Well, I suggested that be considered, but apparently our Parks Department didn't think that it would work. And I think as well, I mean, a lot of
Do
the
you run?
cyclists would...
Do you, no, hang on a second. The Parks Department is part of the council.
Yeah.
Do you not kind of talk to each other and look at honourable compromises that keeps everybody safe and sound?
Well, I would argue that there's not enough discussion between the various silos in the council, but they would say that they did sit down and they thought long and hard about this. But there is another issue, Pat, which is that a lot of the cyclists would like to do a bit of shopping on the way home or on the way in, and to divert the cyclists completely away from the main road wouldn't make sense. And some of them might indeed be going to Marino College or going to schools and other facilities that are alongside the route itself.
Okay. What about the Part 8 argument that you did not put it in your Part 8, this new proposal, which is for the elimination of a traffic lane, that was never open for discussion to the general public?
I think that's a reasonable argument. The law agent who was there in the chamber didn't appear to have an issue with this. It's up to Damian, if he so wishes, to seek legal advice on it. But what we did have, the proposal did come back to what are called the local area committees. In other words, the North Inner City Committee and the North Central Area Committee. So they were discussed in great detail at a committee stage. And often what happens is the results of committee deliberation come up to the full council for approval. You know, every month we have about 400 or 500 pages of council business, and we don't go through everything in detail at the full council meeting.
Yeah. What do you go on, Damian?
Yeah, in this particular incident, that didn't happen, and I think the Central Area Committee actually rejected these proposals, and that wasn't indicated in the file the other night. You know, and this proposal only came on the table at the end of August, and it wasn't discussed at any statutory council meeting. There was a couple of briefing sessions, but that's all. But I mean, everybody, Ciaran and myself, we're probably on the same side as far as cyclists go, but how we solve the problem is a different thing. And I'll be getting on. We've had the Liffey cycle route, and recently the National Transport Authority decided to review that. And I'll be getting on to my colleague Finney McGrath, who'll be in touch with Shane Ross, the Minister for Transport, to ask the National Transport Authority to have a review of this. It's just in a word, it's just bonkers.
Question, Ciaran, which is an interesting one. It was suggested to me here by one of the listeners that it wasn't widely known that the parks people were going to plant twice as many trees as those that were intended to be eliminated in the original plan. Is that so?
It was, but the thing about these trees is that they were much older trees, and you can put in a beautiful young tree, but generally they're only the thickness of your wrist, or maybe if you pay €1,000, you'll get something that maybe is the thickness of your leg. So it's not replacing like with like, Pat. And actually, to be honest, I would be concerned if we are widening roads in 2017 to cater for all the traffic. I think what we want to do is to continue with the trend, which is that we're getting more people to take public transport, more people to walk and cycle, and indeed a lot of the motorists who are stuck in traffic at Fairview Park at rush hour, if they have a quality bike lane, they may well decide to change from the car to the bike, as people have done. And Pat, you will know this area well out in Blackrock. We've had a doubling, if not a trebling, of the amount of cyclists on that new cycle lane out there, and a reduction in car traffic. Yeah. Changing the modal shift is really
I want to,
one of the things we want to
bring you some of the comments. Why don't you come to Fairview and have a look at the proposed cycle lane from Clontarf to the city centre? It's proposed to run it along the commercial side of the road, removing many parking, loading bays, etc., and decimating commercial activity in all of Fairview and Marino. On the other side of the road is Fairview Park, a terribly underutilised and beautiful park with a terrible reputation. God knows why the cycle lane can't run along the front of the park. This would enhance the park safety. I thought it was supposed to be on that side of the road.
There's a bit of confusion there. It's on both sides of the road, Pat, and there isn't a removal of car parking spaces, which will remain. But you got to remember that cyclists use shops as well. They are consumers, they are customers, like everyone out there.
No.
And so pushing the bikes completely away from where the action is not necessarily the right approach.
More comments. The idea of not using Fairview Park for the cycle lane is insane. It works beautifully through Blackrock Park as both a cyclist and a driver. So I can't see any logic in the current proposal for the north side. Connell says, as a city cyclist, Ciaran Cuffe makes me want to get back in my car. His zeal blinds him to common sense. This and the City Quay Cycleway are crazy ideas and turn those who don't cycle into haters of cycling. Joe says, ask cyclists to take a short diversion via Fairview Park is a bit like asking them to stop at red lights. It ain't gonna happen.
Look, Pat, I think that's incorrect. I'm a motorist as well. I drive several times a week and I experience the frustrations that many people feel. But the reality is, for many of the car drivers on this route, the length of the car journey they're taking is fairly small. And if we could just encourage some of these people to think about other options other than driving a car with one person in it, in and out of the city every day, it's probably a good time. It's probably a good thing to happen. And the community that I represent, which is the North Inner City, they often feel quite overwhelmed with the amount of traffic, the amount of cars coming in and out of the city every day. And they often feel under siege from car traffic.
Okay.
So if we can
question.
move people into buses and onto bikes or walking, it's a good thing.
Quick question specifically for you. Please ask Councillor Cuffe how come he rode back from a similar proposal for the Liffey cycle route when his own constituents protested about the implications of diverted traffic. It seems it's okay for Fairview, but not in his own backyard.
I didn't, but the National Transport Authority did. And the NTA has decided to commission a third-party review of the Liffey Cycleway. I still think we need top-quality cycling facilities on the quays and elsewhere. And Pat, an important thing to say is that the Clontarf to Amiens Street to city centre route is the most heavily used route by cyclists. And I think particularly as the numbers of cyclists increase quite dramatically in the city over the last few years, we've got to provide quality cycling facilities for them.
Damian, what do you want to say to Ciaran Cuffe?
I represent an area, it's the Fairview Merino area, and I don't want my area turning into a rat run, because that's what I would see when this happens. So we all have to look after our own areas, but I think we're on the same side. I don't even know if the cycle lobby actually want this. They want it into the park as well, as far as I know.
And do they want to do their shopping?
And they want a two-way segregated one, and they're not getting that. So I do feel that we could have got together. I made my submission. I flagged all these things. I think we're on the same side as far as cyclists. I'm sitting here in the studio. I dislocated my shoulder. I fell off my bike recently. So I am a cyclist. Every sympathy for cyclists. We need better cycling facilities. But there's other ways of doing it. And this was just a knee-jerk reaction. And it's going to be expensive to put right. And
okay, can you bring it back to the law agent or whatever his name is and get a Part 8?
He didn't answer my question the other night. I asked what was the material change, would this affect the Part 8, and I emailed him this morning. But I think possibly the National Transport Authority is the route to go, because as I said, it's taxpayers' money.
All right, we shall watch that space, wherever that space may end up being. Thanks to Ciaran Cuffe, Green Party Councillor and Chair of Dublin City Council Transport Committee, and Damian O'Farrell, an Independent Councillor for Clontarf Ward. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.